Everybody, we are live, and uh, this is going to be an enlightening stream, whether you're prepared for it or not, and whether you think it is going to be enlightening or not. So, first off, it's kind of surreal, in fact, and not from a sycophantic point of view. It's surreal in that about a year ago, I was breaking down the Trump impeachment, trying to understand the arguments, trying to learn the arguments, and broke down and explained Alan Dershowitz's expose and arguments before the Senate. Alan Dershowitz, the legal titan on the floor of the Senate, defending someone he had no interest in defending, but doing it because this is his belief in law now. And I'm breaking it down, from my car. And I'm still working from the car, but 9 months later now, he's on this channel doing a live stream, and it's surreal in that sense. It's surreal in the sense that technology connects everybody in the most absurd ways. Now, that being said, I am in tune with my audience, and I read all the comments, and I've seen the comments. And like I said, this is not going to be a sycophantic live stream. We're gonna get into some of the questions that I know all of you have. Lots of you have, and we're gonna get into the thick of things. Alan is. I've been watching interviews. He is able to deal with it. He's able to answer the hard questions, and he's able to be asked the hard questions. And I think people are going to, learn some things. It may not change your mind. It may change your mind if your mind is able to be changed. And then we're going to get into some of the actual interesting legal stuff. I know people have, on two gripes with Alan. One of which is, one of the three eternal truths relating to Epstein, and we're going to get into it. The other one that I think people have with Alan right now, which I think is a little misguided, relates to the vaccinations. And we're going to get into it. Now, before we even get into it, I did put on this is going to be my Alan shirt, I think. It's going to distinguish the Barn streams. It's like one of my nicest shirts, Simon's. I had the vlog shirt on, but I think this is more appropriate for the circumstances. For tonight, this is going to be a bit different in that I'm not going to bring up the streams as much of the chats as often as I do. Same caveat for all the super chats. I'm going to thank you in advance, but I'm probably going to bring them up much less because it's going to interfere with the flow of this. It's our first stream together, and I don't want to be interrupting the conversation to get the chats, and I think bringing them up is going to distract. So thanking you in advance for the super chats. My moderator, Eric Hunley, is going to remind everybody throughout, because people come and say, hey, you didn't answer my chat. You're taking my money. If you're going to feel that way, don't give super chats. But Eric is going to remind everybody that I'm not going to be taking the super chats like I ordinarily do, because this is a first, and there are serious issues that we're going to be discussing that I don't want the super chat interfering with. What else? Alan Dershowitz, legal titan who defended successfully O.J. Simpson, who represented Jeffrey Epstein, Patty Hearst. I don't want to get into too many of them because there's too many, but pleaded on the Senate floor why Trump should not be impeached for abuse of power. And now he's going to be on this stream, and we're going to do everything. We're going to cover everything. Who he is, what has happened in his career, and the tougher questions relating to specific questions, vaccinations, his CNN defamation lawsuit. We're going to talk about that. But it's going to be amazing, and you're going to enjoy it. And without further ado, I'm bringing him in. The man of the hour, Alan Dershowitz. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you, David, for having me on. I'm not used to Saturday night YouTube television. This is new for me, too, at 82 years old. But hey, if you want to stay young, you have to stay relevant. So here I am.
You know what's amazing? I never fully appreciated, I don't want to say how old you are, but you're old. And I didn't realize you were 81 years old at the time you did the Senate hearing. I mean, the Senate argument, it was, I think 80 is the new 70 or the new 60, but no idea. For anybody who didn't know, Alan Dershowitz was born in 1938. That's a long time ago.
I'm very proud that I was the youngest professor of law ever in Harvard's history, and then the oldest person ever to argue for a president on the floor of the Senate. So I'm happy that the parentheses around my life have extended from being the youngest to the oldest. Let's hope I can continue to be the oldest doing a lot of other things. We'll see.
So now you actually got into the first question, which I want to start. I like to get into the person a little bit. We're not going to spend an hour on your personal history, where you're from, but where are your parents from? Are you first generation, second generation American?
My grandparents came over from Poland, from Galicia, at the end of the 19th and beginning of the 20th century. My parents were both born on the Lower East Side, moved to the Williamsburg neighborhood of Brooklyn, and then the modern Orthodox Jewish neighborhood of Borough Park, where I grew up, went to Yeshiva High School, then went to Brooklyn College, and after Brooklyn College, I then went on to Yale Law School and Harvard.
And I was listening to an interview you gave with, I think it's called Hard Talk, and you mentioned that you were the youngest professor ever tenured at Harvard at the age of 25.
No, at 25, I was hired to be an assistant professor on the tenure track. I didn't get tenure until I was 28, 2.5 years later, but still, that was the youngest ever in the history of Harvard Law School. And then I stayed there for 50 years and retired when I was 75.
And to explain to everybody out there, would the age of your tenure be more shocking or less shocking if it were today?
Probably more shocking today. In math, people get tenure very young, in physics, but not in law. In law today, I don't think anybody gets it less than 35, 34. In those days, if you wrote 2 or 3 really, really impressive law review articles, you could get it. And I'm a writer. I've been writing all my life. I've written 45 books, thousands of articles. Even when I was at law school, I wrote law review articles as a student, and that brought me to the attention of the Harvard faculty. And then when I got to Harvard, I wrote a couple of very always controversial but influential law review articles, and that got me tenure. I was also a very good teacher, so that helped.
Well, and we're going to get into some of your controversial writings, one of which, and I'm seeing it in the chat, about lowering the age of consent, and we'll get there in due time.
Please, yeah.
Now, how do you get into criminal law if you're a professor at Harvard?
Well, I always wanted to be a criminal lawyer. I didn't know there was any other kind of lawyer. I didn't grow up with lawyers. I grew up with people who are not professionals. Everybody in my neighborhood had a store or worked. We didn't have any lawyers. And the only lawyers I knew were from radio and television, criminal lawyers. And of course, I was going to be a defense lawyer. I wasn't going to be a prosecutor. In fact, I always teased Rudy Giuliani. I knew he was going to be a prosecutor because in Brooklyn, he rooted for the New York Yankees. And I, of course, rooted for the Brooklyn Dodgers, and the Dodgers always lost, and the Yankees always won. So, I was going to be a defense lawyer. Never occurred to me to be anything but a defense lawyer, a civil liberties lawyer, a human rights lawyer, to help defend the poor, to help defend people accused of crime. That's the only thing I ever wanted to do. I never cared about money. I never wanted to be a money lawyer of any kind.
Okay, so if you go back to the beginning, what was the first, called it controversial, one of the first more difficult defense cases you took on?
Well, I took on a movie called I Am Curious Yellow, which was an anti-Vietnam film which had some nudity in it, and it was banned. And I took that case up to the United States Supreme Court when I was just a lawyer for 2 or 3 years. And then I represented Hair, the play. And my first major cases were all First Amendment freedom of speech cases. I represented Harry Reams, who was the first actor ever to be indicted for being in a pornographic film, the film Deep Throat. He got paid, I think, like $100 to be in the film, but he got indicted and we won that case. So I had a string of victories on cases of this kind. Pentagon Papers case, all the First Amendment cases. I did most of them, or many of them, pro bono, and established a reputation as a pretty good First Amendment lawyer. Then I also did criminal cases and won a lot of those. So famous people began to come to me when they got in trouble. And I have to tell you, some of the most famous people I've represented have also been some of the most boring people I've ever represented. Just because they're famous or celebrities didn't make them interesting. People who were interesting in my career and cases that were interesting involved obscure people. Let me give you an example. One of my earliest cases, I represented, there were 3 guys in a basement in Brooklyn, Jewish guys in a basement in Brooklyn, and they were dealing drugs. And one of them said to the other, you haven't paid me my full share. If you don't give it to me, I'll shoot you. The other guy, you're not going to shoot me over a few dollars of drugs. Sure enough, the guy took out his gun and shot him right through the heart. He fell down on the floor, and then he turned to my client, who had a gun also, and he pointed his gun at him and said, "You're the only one who saw me do it. And so I don't want you to be able to testify against me. I want you to shoot him too." So my client shot him in the head. My client, the one who shot him in the head, was indicted for murder and was convicted. I then took the appeal. I wasn't his trial lawyer. And the issue was, can you kill somebody who's already dead? And we won that appeal. The court ruled man dies but once, that he was dead when he was shot in the heart, so he couldn't have been killed a second time. So then they went after him for attempted murder. And the question was, can you kill a corpse? Can you attempt to kill a corpse if you don't know necessarily that he's dead? And so we won that case as well. And that became a famous case used in a lot of criminal law books. So, and that was a fascinating client, a fascinating case. Nobody's ever heard of him. I didn't get paid. Got paid a couple of $100 to do it, but that was the kind of cases I love to take. Because I like to bring my courtroom into the classroom, and I'd like to bring the classroom into the courtroom. And that was, I think, the key to my success, being able to bring the classroom to court with me and bringing the courtroom back to class with me.
It's interesting. One of the seminal, or one of the case laws that we study in criminal law relates to the similar idea of sexual assault on someone who actually is deceased. Is it sexual assault, or was it desecrating a corpse? It's one of the fundamental criminal law cases that we study in Canada in law school.
Right.
Okay, so I mean, we're going to get into it quickly, but O.J. Simpson, you successfully defended someone
part of a team.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, it's not to attribute more responsibility to you or disperse it, but
responsibility. I take credit. Don't talk about it in a negative way. I'm very proud of my role in the O.J. Simpson case. Yeah.
So a lot of people, and this is going to work us into another notorious client, but a lot of people think you successfully defended a double murderer by using technicalities and invoking racial questions to undermine a prosecution and get a guilty person off. On the one hand, explain how you sort of, I wouldn't say moralize that, but justify that to yourself and to the world, and how you feel about it in hindsight.
Well, I just go back to the first book of the Bible, Abraham arguing with God when God comes down and says, "I'm going to punish the sinners of Sodom." And Abraham looks at God and he says one of the most powerful things anybody has ever said to a God, "Chalila lacha hashofet kol haaretz lo ya'aseh mishpat." How dare you, the judge of all the world, will not yourself do justice? What if there are 50 innocent people among the people you would sweep away? Would you sweep away the innocent along with the guilty? And Abraham wins the argument. And that's always been the paradigm for me. When I accepted the O.J. Simpson case, he was facing the death penalty. I didn't know whether he was guilty or innocent. He seemed guilty. Everybody thought he was guilty. But then again, everybody who saw the Lockerbie case recently thought the guy who was convicted was guilty. And now, years later, doubts have arisen. Just the other day, a man spent 38 years in prison and was freed when it turned out the woman who was an eyewitness admitted she made up the whole story and lied against him. I've had many cases like that. So he was facing the death penalty. I agreed to take the case. But I'll let you in on a little secret. We didn't win the O.J. Simpson case. We didn't win it. The prosecution lost it. They blew it in every possible way. I was in the courtroom when they asked him to try on the glove. They could have asked him to try on the glove outside the presence of the jury to see if it fit. They could have asked him to try it on without wearing latex gloves, but they were so arrogant that they didn't, and it didn't fit, whether it shrank, whatever it was. He walked up to the jury,
Alan,
or whether he manipulated his fingers. That's not my fault. That's the prosecution's fault. He walked up to the jury and he said, "It's too small." At that point, he had already testified in front of the grand jury. Let me tell you one other thing. So they found a sock. The sock was the best piece of evidence imaginable. It had on it the blood of O.J. Simpson and the victims. And we were able to prove that the sock was found by the police without any blood on it. They took it home. They laid it out flat. Tell you the name of the officer, Officer Van Adder. He took blood that he had in his possession from victim and from O.J., poured it on the sock. How did we prove it? In two ways. Number one, the blood on the sock had a chemical in it called EDTA, not found in the human body, but put in test tubes to prevent coagulation. Number two, the blood splatter evidence showed that the sock was laying flat when the blood was poured on it and wasn't being worn. If it had been worn, you wouldn't have seen mirror images on all four sides. So the police tried to frame somebody they believe was guilty, and we caught him, and the jury acquitted. Very proud of it. I do it again. That's my job. Better 10 guilty go free than one innocent be wrongly confined. What upsets me is just recently I tried to save the life of a man on death row. I appealed to the president. I had time with him on the phone. I tried to persuade him to commute the sentence to life imprisonment. The man was not guilty of a capital crime. I couldn't persuade the president. I was not involved as his lawyer. I was just doing it as a public servant for service, but they executed him. That's what makes me lose sleep. When an innocent man is executed, I don't lose sleep when, because of prosecutorial misconduct, a possibly guilty man is acquitted.
And so, I mean, this is going to be the response, and I'm reading it already in some of the chat. And look, as a lawyer, I know what your answer is going to be. People are going to say, well, what about justice for Ron Goldman? What about justice for Nicole Brown?
That's somebody else's job. That's not my job. My job is to get justice for the defendant. I'll give you an example. What if O.J. Simpson, after the chase, had been in an accident, been taken to the hospital, and one of your self-righteous viewers who doesn't think that anybody should do anything except fight for the victims, what if the doctor who believed strongly that O.J. Simpson was guilty was asked to cure him of what could have been a life-threatening illness? Would the doctor do anything but use every resource available to him to save this man? Would he think about the victims at this point? No, he has a job to do. His job as a doctor is to save the life of this, what he believed is guilty person. My job as a lawyer, and it's a very important job. And if you don't like it, folks, move to Iran and China. There's no problem. Lawyers don't represent people the government say is guilty. If they do, they get themselves in trouble. But in America, lawyers defend the guilty and the innocent alike. And the reason we defend the guilty is to make sure the innocent aren't prosecuted. The vast majority of my clients have been guilty. The vast majority of every criminal defense lawyer's clients have been guilty. Would anybody want to live in a country where the majority of clients were innocent? Iran, China, Belarus, Russia. Go there. But if you want to live in a country where the vast majority of people who are convicted of crime are guilty, live in America, where zealous defense attorneys don't let the government get away with anything. We push them. We argue. Yes, technicalities. You call it a technicality. I call it the Constitution. And so I'm going to continue to defend people you think are guilty, and you're not going to like me for it. And too bad. I'm right. You're wrong.
Well, and now you use the word, you get justice for a guilty client, and some people are just going to look at you and say, you're not getting justice for a guilty client. You are actually committing an injustice for the victim.
I'm not committing it. The judge is committing it. The jury is committing it. The prosecutor is committing it. The only person who's not committing it is the defense attorney. You know, when the Catholic Church decides to nominate somebody to become a saint, they appoint the devil's advocate, the person who has to argue the other side. In the Jewish Talmud, if there was a case of murder and the defendant was convicted immediately without any dissenting opinions, nobody presented the other side, the conviction was reversed. We have an adversary system, and we have to keep the adversary system. Look, people would have loved me if I had defended O.J. Simpson vigorously and lost. The fact that I won, the fact that I helped produce a not guilty verdict for somebody they believe is guilty, that's what gets them upset. Well, the system doesn't work that way. You don't make the decision. The jury makes the decision. The judge makes the decision. The appellate courts make the decision. Blame them. Blame the prosecutors. Do not blame defense attorneys. They're the last bastion of liberty that stands between you and oppressive government and oppressive prosecution.
Well, I would add one thing where you say, you know, if OJ had showed up after a car accident at the hospital, would the doctor refuse to perform surgery? In a world now where we actually do have people suggesting if you gather in a group and catch a certain illness, should you be denied care? You have people who actually adopt, you know, who might be inclined to live by that type of ideology. I do think it's part and parcel of some form of a cancel culture type mentality where you want to punish the people who you disagree with. But
look, if I were a doctor and Hitler showed up on my table, I would strangle him to death, not as a lawyer or as a doctor, but as a human being. But we're not talking about Hitler now. We're talking about people who have been charged with crime under our system, who you think are guilty, may well be guilty, but they deserve the most zealous defense possible. And I'm going to continue to do it no matter how unpopular it makes me. You know, it's interesting. I used to be able to say that no criminal defense lawyer has ever run for public office or been successful. It's only prosecutors who run for public office. Every previous president who's been a lawyer has been a prosecutor. Joe Biden was a defense attorney. He was a public defender for a very short period of time, to be sure. But I think he is the first president in our history ever to be a public defender. Abraham Lincoln was a defense attorney. John Adams, talk about O.J. Simpson. John Adams defended the British soldiers in Boston who were accused of committing the Boston Massacre. And he was berated. He was hated. His own cousin, Sam Adams, wouldn't talk to him. But he did the right thing.
Okay, now I'm going to ask you something that I know people are asking themselves now. You say most defense lawyers have guilty clients.
Of course.
I think people will agree with that. Now, if you know, and I'm not talking OJ anymore, but if you know your client is guilty,
right?
What are the limits to what you're prepared to do to try to successfully get an acquittal of a client you know to be guilty?
I don't put him on the witness stand because I will not allow a client to lie if I'm his lawyer. I challenge the government. You'll notice O.J. Simpson did not take the witness stand. F. Lee Bailey wanted him to. I very much didn't want him to, not necessarily because of my feeling about guilt or innocence. He would have made a terrible, terrible witness. But ethically, you cannot allow your client to lie, nor can you lie, but you can challenge the government at every turn. Let me give you the hypothetical I give to my law students, and people disagree, and your viewers will probably disagree. Your client comes to you and says, I just robbed a bank, and I've been arrested, and I'm about to be tried. And you're a great lawyer, and you know the only witness against your client is the bank teller. And there's a videotape that shows the bank teller who identified your client as the robber taking off her glasses and kind of making herself look pretty at the time that the robbery was taking place. Are you entitled to cross-examine that eyewitness and say, did you take your glasses off? What is your eyesight with your glasses off? Were you taking your glasses off just to, make yourself look, putting herself in a negative light in front of the jury? You know that she identified your client correctly because your client has told you that. But are you allowed to cross-examine her in a way that casts doubt on her by truthfully making her acknowledge that she took her glasses off? That's a hard question. That's what I used to teach in legal ethics. And there's no good answer to that question, but there's a good answer to the question of if the government goes after your client and breaks into their home and illegally obtains evidence, there's a good answer to the question. Are you allowed to keep that evidence out, even though you know it's evidence that will prove conclusively that your client is guilty? So there are easy answers and there are hard answers, and there are some that have no answers. And that's why, in my experience, criminal defense lawyers are among the most ethical lawyers and the most ethical people I know, because they're always walking on morally treacherous ground. And we think about it a lot. When I compare the ethics of criminal lawyers to the ethics of journalists, I mean, ethics of journalists sounds to me almost like an oxymoron in the face of many of the journalists I've encountered, present company excluded. But when I talk about journalists who work for the New York Times, journalists who work for CNN, journalists who work for many of the major networks, they wouldn't occur to them in a trillion years to think of any issue in ethical terms. I think through every single issue ethically. I have never and would never do anything in my profession that was unethical or illegal or against my own personal principles or morality. But my own personal principles and morality say you must defend people you know are guilty. By the way, you almost never know. Client comes to you in the first meeting. Not only am I not guilty, I did nothing wrong, and I ought to be nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. By the second meeting, the Nobel Prize is off the table. I didn't do this, but I did other things. The third meeting, well, I did this, but I had mitigating circumstances. The fourth meeting is I did this. Can you get me off? So mostly they don't tell you that. Mostly they say, I'm innocent. How could you? When I met O.J. Simpson, first question to me was, Alan, how can anybody think I did this? I said, O.J., everybody thinks you did this. Everybody thinks
I got to say, Alan, that question to me would be the most solid indication of guilt that the not say senseless denial, but the self-reflectionless denial of how could anyone think I did it, as though it's everyone else's fault for thinking, that's the type of pathology that makes me think someone is totally guilty.
And you have a right to that opinion. And OJ, of course, ultimately was found guilty of another crime in Nevada thereafter. And I'm not here to tell you, nor did I ever say to the jury, remember, we criminal defense lawyers, we don't use the term innocent. We use the term not guilty. Not guilty is a technical term. It means that the government has failed to prove the elements of the crime beyond a reasonable doubt. And there are jurors who come back and say, we think your guy did it, but the government failed to prove intent, failed to prove premeditation, failed to prove the corpus delicti. There are all of those. There's a famous story about that. Guy is on trial for murdering his wife. They never found the body, but there was overwhelming circumstantial evidence that he killed her. The defense attorney at the end of the case in the closing argument says, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you're going to be in for the shock of your life. When I count to 3, you look at that door and the wife will walk through that door. He goes 1. He goes 2. Every juror has their eyes on the door. He goes 3. Nothing happens. He turns to the jury and says, you have to acquit. You all looked at the door. That meant you had a reasonable doubt, but they convicted. And afterward, he went to the jurors and said, how could you convict? You all looked at the door. And they said, yeah, but we noticed your client didn't look at the door.
You know what? I knew the story and forgot the punchline. That's what kids will do to you. Okay, now, incidentally, you a little bit earlier, you brought up the question, the teller taking her glasses off, and it's a gray zone answer, and it's a gray zone answer that's going to bring us a perfect segue into what I know everybody in the chat wants to know. We're going to get to Epstein. We're going to get to all the nitty gritty of Epstein, but let's start with one of the accusations that I get mail, I get messages, and people say Dershowitz was instrumental in smearing the victims of Epstein. I think it was 2005 or 2008 when the first charges were being brought in Florida. You went to their MySpace social media accounts to drudge up dirt on them, make them look like they were asking for it, for lack of a better word. And that's sort of the question of now, where you're dealing with not a witness necessarily. Now you're dealing with a victim, but it's the same question that gets asked. What are you allowed to do to try to discredit the victim for the benefit of your client in their defense? So a lot of people are going to hold that against you. A lot of people will not forgive you for it.
Well, I'm not asking for forgiveness, and I couldn't care less if you hold it against me. I don't even know how to do MySpace or any of those. I'm not technical. I didn't do any of that, but Jeffrey Epstein's private investigator did. And he then wrote me a report which had material that raised questions about the credibility of the witnesses. If I had failed to bring that to the attention of the prosecutor, I would have been disbarred, and I should have been disbarred. You must bring to the attention of the prosecutor anything that raises questions about the credibility of witnesses. You say they're not witnesses, they're just victims. Of course they were witnesses. They were the people who were going to testify against Jeffrey Epstein. My job was to persuade the prosecutors that they were not credible witnesses, and they were not credible witnesses. Remember, people who are real victims can also tell lies or exaggerate or make up stories. And so the job of the defense lawyer, and I, along with everybody else on the team, and it was a team consisting of lots and lots of people, brought to the attention of the prosecutors the credibility problems of some of these women who had lied repeatedly about other episodes, who had lied about their age, who had lied about a range of other things. These are issues that would have come up at trial. At trial, of course, you have to cross-examine witnesses, and it's the job of the defense attorney to bring up these issues before trial. And so, yeah, of course I did that, and I would do it today in any case. And if your son were charged with a serious crime in college or elsewhere, you would want me to bring that up. If a young woman at a college accused your son of improper conduct, and your son had evidence that she had lied about other people and made up stories and had this and that, you would want me to bring that up to protect your son. So don't apply a double standard and say what's good for your son is not good for somebody else. That's the job of the criminal defense lawyer. Jeffrey Epstein didn't think I did a good enough job. He fired me because I only got a deal whereby he'd have to plead guilty to a felony. He'd have
and register
as a sex offender and not have any jail time, but still a sex offender and felony. Epstein said that's not good enough. He fired me. He hired somebody else who was local, who got him a better deal than the federal government prosecuted. He brought me back at that point, and my job at that point was to prove not that he didn't do anything wrong. He was being charged with a federal crime. Federal crime requires an interstate nexus. In other words, travel with the young woman in interstate commerce for purposes of having sex. And there was no such evidence. So we persuaded the prosecution that if they brought a federal case, they would have lost. So in the end, they agreed to a plea bargain where he would plead to state charges, get 18 months in prison, be a felon, lose his, have to register as a sex offender. That's what happened. At the time, we only knew about a handful of complaints against him. All the other complaints came up later. But I did what every criminal defense attorney do. I'm not saying I'm right because other people do it. We're all right. Every one of us is right. That's what we have to do. When a person is charged with a crime, you do an investigation. You find every possible hole you can in the prosecution's case, legally, factually, in terms of testimony, in terms of credibility. That's what you do. If you don't want to live in that system again, there are plenty of countries where criminal defense attorneys don't do that. But in America, if we don't do it, we're disbarred, and appropriately disbarred. I taught legal ethics at Harvard for 25 years, and I taught my students to do exactly that. And I'm proud of the fact that I have hundreds of law students out there challenging the credibility of witnesses, challenging the prosecution. And they're great lawyers, and I'm very proud of them.
And now it's a difficult thing. Now, I understand and I respect what you're saying in this pursuit of, I won't call it justice because people will not accept it as justice, but pursuit of keeping the system in check. I personally could never stomach it in a million years. I couldn't stomach it.
You didn't become a criminal defense lawyer. That's your choice. I couldn't stomach doing wills and hedge funds and all that. I could never stomach doing
I couldn't
that.
stomach it for a different reason, not because, I find it boring, but because I'm not sure that I would feel good about myself at the end of the day.
I'm not sure I'd feel good about myself helping rich people get richer at the expense of poor people. I'm not sure I would feel good about that at the end of the day. That's why I chose to represent mostly poor people. Half of my cases pro bono. I'm the only lawyer, I think, the only criminal defense lawyer in America who all through his career has done 50% of his cases pro bono. Most of my clients you've never heard of. They are obscure. Many of them women, many of them abused women. I represented a lot of victims of crime. For example, women who were abused and then killed their husband in an attempt to prevent their abuse. I've represented people who were locked up in mental hospitals by their husband who wanted to steal their money or wanted to have a divorce Italian style or things of that kind. So I've had a mixed career with multiple clients, and I'm very proud of my career. I would say the only two clients I wish I had never met were Leona Helmsley, who was just a tax case, but she was impossible, and Jeffrey Epstein, not because of the role I played in defending him, but because it led to this false accusation by a woman I never met. Right. But those are the only two cases I regret.
No. We're going to have more questions about the Epstein.
And by the way, I've also defended people on death row who were innocent, poor people who couldn't afford it, all pro bono. And so don't stereotype my career based on O.J. Simpson, Patty Hearst, Klaus von Bülow.
Well, Patty Hearst. Patty Hearst is an interesting one. Patty Hearst is a case I could have taken because I do think that she was more a victim than a.
Let me tell you, you'd never be a decent criminal defense lawyer. Sorry to tell you that, because you don't pick and choose your cases. You can't be a good criminal defense lawyer if you like Patty Hearst and don't like O.J. Simpson. If you're going to be a criminal defense lawyer, you got to buy the whole hog. You got to be willing to defend anybody who's charged with a serious crime. My criteria is the more likely the person appears to be guilty, the more unpopular, the more he's hated, the more I'm going to take the case because you won't. And that's why I have to be a criminal defense lawyer. You should stick to doing YouTube and doing your legal work, your money legal work, because you would not be a criminal defense lawyer because you allow your own personal predilections to influence who your clients would be.
Well, 100%. And we'll get 100%. But one of my underlying reasons is also, I think, I don't want to use an inflammatory comparison, but I think I don't want to associate for the reasons which now I think I don't want to associate with certain types of clients
So
because
you
of
wouldn't, so
what
you wouldn't be a doctor in a bad neighborhood either. Then you wouldn't be a doctor in Bay Ridge because in Brooklyn, because allegedly a lot of mafia people live there and might come and be your patients. What do you
well,
mean you don't want to associate with them? Then you wouldn't be a priest. You wouldn't be a rabbi. You're not befriending people just because you associate with them as a professional. When you're a doctor in a doctor-patient relationship, a priest-penitent-patient relationship, a lawyer-client relationship, you're not associating with these people. That's McCarthyism. You
okay, no,
are
true.
performing a professional role.
But now this is where I'm going to stop you. You're not, and I do agree with you in the same sense that I've had Cernovich on my channel. I'll discuss things with anybody because I don't think you associate through discussion. But
Right.
there is a line when representing a client. There is a fine line between maintaining that distance, and I find sometimes with clients and lawyers, the lawyers sometimes they cross that line, not in a nefarious way, just in an inadvertent natural evolution way, and it gets people into trouble. In the same way, I think. That line may have been crossed between you and Epstein, but I want to get there in a second. But
Not at all. Not at
hold
all.
on,
And I'll
let me
explain
just.
why. Yeah. Yeah.
But one thing that I do want to say for everybody who says no justice, I can't believe this guy defends, alleged whatevers. I've thought about this earlier, that when people think you can be pressured morally into not representing someone who may very well be guilty to make the prosecution prove its case, it's only a matter of time before you get into a world where there's going to be political and social pressure to get lawyers to not represent political clients or clients for political or social reasons.
That's already happening. It's already happening. Look, I can't speak at Harvard, even though I taught there for 50 years, according to a student protest now, because I represented President Trump, who I didn't vote for in 2016. I voted for Hillary Clinton. I can't speak at Harvard because I was, quote, associated with President Trump. I have to go through a moral cleansing program and an admission of guilt, which of course I won't go through. I'm very proud of my representation of the Constitution on the floor of the Senate, because President Trump was impeached on unconstitutional grounds. I would have made the same argument if Hillary Clinton had been elected and she had been impeached on unconstitutional grounds. So we're getting that already. Already the McCarthyism is seeping from O.J. Simpson to President Trump to men who disagree with women on the Me Too movement, to you name it. Anything that's politically correct today, people don't want to represent them. And if you want to win popularity contests, be a prosecutor or represent only people who pass the David approval test. But if you want to be a real criminal defense lawyer, you got to take my approach, which is the taxi cab approach. First person who hails the cab gets in it. You got to go take him wherever she or he wants to go. And you can't do anything illegal or unethical, but you don't get to pick and choose who you represent. At least I don't. I pick the most controversial, the most unpopular, because I had tenure. I couldn't get fired. I didn't have a law firm making me do things. I felt a special responsibility to represent the worst of the worst, the most popular of the unpopular, the most despised of the despised. And that's the most important function a criminal defense lawyer can serve.
And I say that for good or for bad, it elicits the responses that you see. I mean, that you must that you're well aware of.
I've been eliciting that response for 50 years. It's nothing new to me.
Okay, now let's
people sometimes come over to me at a bar or restaurant and say, I wonder, has anybody ever asked you this question before? They really say this. Has anybody ever asked you this question before? How can you represent somebody who might be guilty? I say, oh my God, 50 years. I've never thought of that. Thank you so much for raising that question.
Well,
I'm going to have to go home and sleep on it now because I've never thought of that before. Nobody's ever asked me that question before.
But the thing is, and I think in people's minds, there's different thresholds of guilt, and there's different thresholds of that for which they're guilty. So, definitively guilty, questionably guilty, definitively guilty of robbing a bank, definitively guilty of,
Let me give you an example of why that isn't so. Ron Sullivan, friend of mine, a professor at Harvard Law School, the former dean of one of the Harvard colleges, the first African-American, along with his wife, to become a dean of a college at Harvard. Great man, great man. So a few years ago, he represented the end for the Boston Patriots, a man named Hernandez, who was accused of 2 brutal murders, gangland style murders, horrible murders. Nobody in his house, the place where he was the college, Nobody said they felt afraid, they were scared, they felt unsafe. Here was a lawyer who was representing murderers, but then he represented Harvey Weinstein, and they fired him because the people in the house said they were afraid. They were scared. They couldn't be in the same house. They felt unsafe being in the house of somebody who could represent Harvey Weinstein. No problem when he was representing two murderers. So it's not the seriousness of the crime. It's McCarthyism, it's political correctness, and it's today's de jure hatred. Today it's Harvey Weinstein. When I was growing up, it was communists. And murderers, nah, that's okay. You can represent multiple murderers. Nobody would have fired Ron Sullivan. It's hypocrisy at its worst.
And it's an interesting thing because I'm sufficiently self-reflective that I know a lot of people will say, "Oh, Viva, it's a question of morality. You have good morals. You won't defend a guilty person."
I have as good morals as any of your listeners and any of your viewers. I will compare my morals. I understand that criminal justice is a system, not a result. It's a system. And for the system to work, you need to have vigorous defense attorneys. I have a very high sense of morality. I would never do anything that violated my personal morality. I would never do anything that violated my belief system. I operate from a very high sense of morality. Many of your viewers just don't get it. Sorry. Or you disagree with it.
No, I understand.
But I'm not accusing you.
No.
But your self-righteous viewers who are writing these things on the side now, you have no better morality than I do. And we have a different understanding of what the role of a criminal defense lawyer is. Let me give you an example. You're a priest, high morality, a priest. Person comes to you as a priest and says, "Forgive me, my father, I have sinned. I beat up my wife every night. And I want to get it off my chest. And I want you to forgive me. And I'd like to really get out of here quick because tonight I'm going to kill her." What do you do if you're a priest?
Well, in that case, I report him to the cops because there's an immediate threat.
And you get fired as a priest. You can't do it. I cannot do it as a priest. So you're not going to be a priest. So let's now understand. You're not going to be a criminal defense lawyer. You're not going to be a priest. You're not going to be a doctor in bad neighborhoods. But let me get the priest argument straight. So a priest did that in Milan, I think. He reported on some people from the mafia, and he lost his priesthood. A priest has a job. His job is not to rat out his confessors. His job is to change them internally, get them to obey religion, forgive them, give them all the things that religious people do. That's his job. But as a priest, unlike a lawyer, if somebody came and said, "I'm going to kill my wife," of course I would report him. I'm allowed to. A priest is not allowed to. So is a priest less moral than I am? I want all of you who are complaining about morality to go to your priest, your rabbi, and your minister, ask him that question, look him in the eye and say, "You're immoral." You won't say that because he's a priest and I'm a lawyer.
And by the way, incidentally, Alan, the second half of my sentence was that some people are going to look at me and say that I'm more moral. Others, and I say this too, might just look at me and say I'm a bit of a coward because I wouldn't do that which I know a fully functioning system of justice requires.
You're not a coward. You're not a coward. You have different, I tell students when they ask me advice, what to do as a career, I say, don't take a job, create a career for yourself, figure out who you are, figure out what your morality is, figure out what your priorities are, figure out what makes you happy, and create a job. I mentioned this on your show, and you fill that to the T because you created a career for yourself. So I'm not calling you a coward. I'm saying we have different personalities and different approaches to life and law, but don't condemn my morality because it's different from yours.
Well, I think people don't fully appreciate that the vigorous defense attorneys are needed to keep the system in check so that cops don't get away.
They realize it when their kids get busted. They often say that a conservative is a liberal who's been mugged. My response to that is, and a liberal is a conservative whose kid's been busted. And suddenly they want to invoke all the, quote, technicalities. Can't we exclude the evidence? Isn't the statute of limitations gone? Everybody wants every possible justification. So everybody agrees with me when their kid's busted or when other relatives are busted. They just don't agree with me when they're thinking about it as an abstraction because it allows them to sit and pontificate from what they believe is a higher level of morality.
Well, I say good defense attorneys are exactly like cops, is everybody hates them until they need them.
Right.
And now, okay, this is the other issue. Why I could never do it?
Yep.
Because the line of separation between client and the individuals sometimes clash. And from the practice of law, I've noticed that clients, I can judge a client by the lawyer and I can judge a lawyer by the client often enough. You know, certain types of lawyers have certain types of clients, just as a general rule. But sometimes that line between lawyer and client gets blurred, where you end up laying with dogs and waking up with ticks, which
Right.
is, I think, a bit of which brings us into the Epstein.
Yeah,
So,
sure.
you know, like people want me to ask you. You know,
Please, please.
you've
I
been
have
to, you've been
nothing
to
to
Epstein's.
hide. Yeah.
Here, how many times have you been to Epstein's Island? And then we're gonna.
One. Okay, let's be very clear. Epstein bought his island. Let me back up a little bit. The day Epstein was disclosed to have done anything wrong was the day my acquaintanceship with him terminated. I never had a friendship with him from that day on. When I first met him, I met him in the summer of 1996. I was introduced to him by the lady Rothschild, a very eminent person, previously married to the borough president of Manhattan, currently married to the Lord Evelyn Rothschild. She introduced me to him, said he was a great man. He was a scientist. He was contributing money to Harvard. He was a close friend of the president of Harvard. He had built the Harvard Hill Ale along with Leslie Wexner. As far as I knew, he was the most eminent person possible. And so I went to his seminars, but I had never had any idea that he had done anything wrong until I learned about it several years later. So I met him in 1996, and we had this acquaintanceship. But he had done nothing wrong as far as I could tell. I never saw him in the presence of anybody young. My wife and I spent some time with him, my daughter. And so in 1998, he buys this island. And in April, he then refurbishes it. And in December of that year, which is my best recollection, I can check the records, but I'm pretty sure it's December that year. It's a few months after he buys the island. My wife, my daughter, and I were vacationing on Guadalupe over Christmas. And he said, Alan, I just bought this island. I'd love to have you and Carolyn and your daughter see it. And so he sent us a little one propeller plane to Guadalupe. We flew to St. Thomas and we took a boat. We went to his island. The only people on the island were him and Ghislaine Maxwell and people repairing the house and a cook. There were no young people, nobody at all. We spent one night on the island along with Professor Michael Porter, who was a distinguished professor at the Harvard Business School, his wife, and two of his in-law relatives. That was the only time I ever set foot on Jeffrey Epstein's island, period. I will give anybody $1 million cash if they can prove, which they can't, of course, that I ever set foot on Jeffrey Epstein's island after that time or outside of the presence of my wife and daughter. It simply didn't happen. And no one has ever alleged it happened. People just misunderstand it because it later became known as Pedophile Island. And because I was once on the island, they assume I must have been there when things were going on. No. What happened is Ghislaine Maxwell was there. She was very nice. She took my daughter to the beach. They looked for buried treasure. She made my daughter little toast soldiers. My wife had a massage. I did not on the island. And that was the end of it. We took a plane home commercially. The only time I was ever on the island. And that is categorically the case. I have never had any association with Epstein from the moment I found out what he was accused of, except a professional relationship. I defended him, but I was not friendly with him. Once the case was over, I never again had any relationship with him. He called me on the phone from time to time about legal advice growing out of the plea bargain, but any kind of personal relationship ended on the day he told me that he had been accused of these crimes. And the first crimes he was accused of involved, I think, 3 or 4 women.
I got to bring this one up because
Sure,
people were making a joke. I didn't get the joke, but then I saw an interview you did where you mentioned having gotten a massage and left your underwear on, and that became something of a meme.
It became a joke, and it became a joke. What happened is when you went to his home in Palm Beach, whether it was me or whether it was the majority leader of the Senate or the president of this or the president of universities, you always were offered a professional massage therapist would always be on hand to give you a massage. We had no idea that other massages were going on in a completely private, separate part of the house. And I had one massage in his house in Palm Beach with an older Russian woman that was confirmed by his housekeeper. The housekeeper knew her name, knew that it was arranged. And yes, I kept my shorts on because it was a shoulder massage. And she wanted, in fact, I remember very vividly, she wanted to put her knees on my shoulder. And I didn't like the massage at all. And after a few minutes, I said, no, that's enough. But it was a shoulder massage. So, of course, I kept my shorts on. Big deal. I didn't have to acknowledge that, but I wanted to tell the truth about everything. I didn't want to hide anything. I have nothing to hide. From the day I met Jeffrey Epstein in 1996 till today, I have had sexual contact with one woman, my wife, my lovely wife, who I love, who I've been married to for 34 years. I've never touched inappropriately. I don't touch people's hair. I don't flirt. I don't go to bars. I have never had sex with anybody but my wife during this period of time, or any sexual contact. I have never had sexual contact with an underage person. I have never done anything like that. And any allegation to the contrary is provably false.
Now, incidentally, it's one of the things Robert Barnes and I talk about during our streams where
Sure.
he typically says, abusers typically have a pattern of abuse. They have a history of abuse and not.
I have a history. I have a long history, 50 years at Harvard, thousands of female students, hundreds of female research assistants and secretaries, not a single complaint or inkling or suggestion of anything wrong. And I did nothing wrong. Yeah, I have a pattern. I have a long pattern. And my pattern is I am not somebody who does that kind of thing. They picked on the wrong innocent person. Look, we know why they did it. They did it for money. We have it on tape. We have our own lawyer, David Boies, saying to me in a recorded conversation, we know you couldn't have been in the places where she claims to have had sex with you. It would have been impossible. She's wrong, simply wrong.
Okay.
We have a tape recording by her best friend saying she never mentioned you. She didn't want to name you. Her lawyers pressured her into it to collect $1 billion from Leslie Wexner. That was the plan. We have her own lawyer admitting, her other lawyer, Bradley Edwards, that she perjured herself about Leslie Wexner. We have her own emails admitting she never met me. We have a book manuscript admitting she never met me. There has never been a more overwhelming case of innocence on my part and perjury on her part. And I won't rest until this woman goes to prison. This is not a woman who made a mistake. This is a woman who sat with her lawyers and planned my destruction. I am a victim, and victims should speak out. And that's why I'm speaking out. I am a victim. I'm a victim like Joseph in the Bible was a victim. I'm a victim like other people historically have been victims. And I will not rest until I get justice as a victim. And my justice is Virginia Giuffre going to prison. She didn't make a mistake. She willfully and deliberately for money. She's already bought a $2 million home with the money she's earned by accusing other people. She is a perpetrator, and I am her victim.
Actually, we'll get into that lawsuit and we'll get into Giuffre. Actually, one thing that I wanted to mention or wanted to ask you about, because people were asking the plea deal that Epstein got. Yeah. And I forget the name of the prosecutor, but it was the prosecutor.
Acosta, yeah.
And he was the prosecutor who ended up apparently cross-examining the victim's witnesses in a manner that at the time was described as being akin to the defense attorney prosecution. He's the one who apparently got the deal, which Epstein at first refused, and then Epstein got a better deal.
No idea what you're talking about.
Okay.
What happened was this. There was a state deal. The state deal, I struck the first state deal with the state attorney, along with other lawyers, but I was primarily responsible for that one. And then he rejected it and fired me. Then another state lawyer got a better state deal for him, no felony. Then the feds came in. And we had 3 or 4 meetings with the feds. Acosta was at one of the meetings. The FBI was at meetings. I helped persuade them that they had no federal case, that there was no credible evidence that he had ever taken a woman across state lines. Maybe he did, but there was no evidence of it. and therefore they would lose their case if they tried him federally for interstate transportation, basically the Mann Act and variations of that act over time. They couldn't prove interstate nexus. So they agreed to have a state prosecution in which he would plead guilty and then pay all the victims who came to him and were registered as a sex offender. That's the deal we struck. Don't blame me for that. Blame the prosecutors. They accepted it. Blame the judge. The judge signed off on it. Defense attorneys are supposed to get the best deal we can, and I did.
No, and incidentally, this was actually not to blame you. From what I've been reading, the prosecutor seems to have been not doing the job properly in terms of letting Epstein off too easily. And you know what? I don't actually. I know who is suing who between you and Guthrie. Are you both suing each other now?
Yes. So she initially sued me for defamation because I called her a serial liar and said I could prove that she lied not only about me, but lied about so many other prominent people. For example, she swears, she said she was with Al Gore and Tipper Gore on Epstein's Island. And she saw Al Gore looking into Tipper Gore's eyes. She described it in great detail, how they were loving and how, although there were a lot of young women there, Al Gore never took his eyes off his wife. Only once, when Jeffrey Epstein took him away and they walked on the beach on Jeffrey Epstein's island. Great story. Al Gore has never been on the island. Al Gore has never met Jeffrey Epstein. Tipper Gore has never been on the island. She simply made up the whole story. And so she is a serial liar. I stand behind that. She sued me for calling her a serial liar. I sued her for making up false accusations against me. She's also had her lawyer sue me. David Boies has sued me. And I am now countersuing David Boies. If his law firm survives, it looks like they may be going out of business. And the law firm is furious at him for suing me because it's hurt their business terribly, because I think everybody knows that David Boies knows that I'm innocent. He told me that. He told me it on tape. So how can he deny it now?
Okay. And then incidentally, I think I don't like talking about pending lawsuits in general.
I don't mind. I can tell you what I can tell you. I can't tell you about material. I can't tell you about material that's not available to the public, but I can tell you about anything else.
No, but I prefer to leave it at that. I mean, I think you've said your bit. You said your piece. I think I've asked. I mean,
and if there are any questions, look, the media has been hounding me about this since 2014. I have never refused to answer a question because I have nothing to hide. The reason I'm fighting back, other people who have been accused by the same woman aren't fighting. The reason I'm fighting back is I have nothing to hide. I've led a completely honorable life personally. Yes, controversial. Yes, I've defended bad people, but I have never done anything wrong regarding underage girls or anything of that kind. By the way, this woman was not underage. She lied about her age. First, she claimed she was 14. Then she said she was 15. She remembered spending a Sweet 16 party with Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. Turned out her own employment records prove she was 17 when she first met Jeffrey Epstein, above the age of consent in New York and Florida. I'm sorry, New York, the Virgin Islands. And let's get, because I know it's on people's mind, my article that I wrote.
Yeah, well, that was a segue.
20 years ago about lowering the age of consent. That was a feminist argument. Feminists all over the country were saying if a woman who is 17 or 16 can consent to have an abortion, how can you say she's not mature enough to consent to have sex? The age of consent all over Europe is 15. The age of consent in Canada 16. Is, I think, 16. The age of consent in New York is 17. The age of consent in Florida was 18. Now, people start having sex in Florida, not at 18, but at 15 or 16. And so it's very important to make the age of consent comport with what the realities of the world were. And so many feminists were making that argument. I made that argument. It was utterly uncontroversial when I made it. But then 20 years later, people said, aha, Dershowitz must have anticipated that he was going to have sex with a young woman 20 years later. So he wrote this article and planted it to give himself a defense. Duh. I mean, that's ridiculous. I stand by my argument. I think the age of consent should be lower than 18. I don't think it should be 14, but I think it should be a reasonable age. My grandmother got married when she was 15. Well, I mean, that doesn't mean that it's the right thing, but
incidentally, I'm looking.
It's a fair argument to have. Yeah.
No, and I'm reading the chat as it goes by, and people say, look, normalizing pedophilia. People should appreciate the age of consent in Canada is 16 years old. And now, without commenting on the argument, I think people want to connect dots once they've come to a conclusion about somebody, and despite everything you've said, there are going to be people who think you're guilty. There are going to be people who think you're guilty by association.
They're ignoramuses if they think I'm guilty because they haven't looked at the evidence. Read my book. I have a book. It's called Guilt by Accusation. In it, I have the tape recordings of the lawyers, the emails. I have all the proof. If any of you read this book and then think I'm guilty, still write me a letter. I'd be really interested in how you could possibly think I'm guilty in light of her own emails admitting she never met me, her own manuscript admitting she never met me, her lawyer saying on tape she was wrong, her other lawyer saying she committed perjury, lied about Leslie Wexner, her best friend saying that she was pressured into falsely accusing me, an FBI investigation by the former head of the FBI concluding that I was entirely innocent. Read the book, and then your ignorance perhaps will be cured. But right now, if any of you think I'm guilty, A, you're an ignoramus, and you're a bigot, and C, the idea that you use the word pedophilia, even the accusation is that she was 18 or 19. Didn't happen. I never met her. That's not pedophilia when you're 18 or 19. Otherwise, half of the teenagers in this country would be pedophiles.
Now, one thing it was about, about Virginia. I mean, I think a lot of people are going to look,
please have her on the show, by the way.
Well, no, because I want to move on.
Her on the show. Let's hear what she has to say.
I want to do a lot of stuff. No, but a lot of people are going to look at you. Some are going to say you're standing up for yourself. Others are going to look at you and say you're defensive. Me think he doth protesteth too much. Others are going to look at you and say, even if you're right, that they think Virginia is a victim, and probably rightfully so, of someone. And Robert Barnes and I have had this discussion in other contexts that sometimes the victim is in fact a bona fide victim, but has a false memory syndrome, or a false memory in that they
don't give her that excuse. This is a woman who sat down there at the Hamlet moment and said, to be or not to be a perjurer. I am now going to cross the line and willfully, deliberately, with premeditation and malice aforethought, I'm going to commit perjury, and I'm going to frame Alan Dershowitz for something he not only didn't do, but that I never even met him. This is not false memory syndrome. This is simply her deciding to victimize me. There is no excuse or justification for what she did. She belongs in prison. Her lawyers should be disbarred. And I'm not going to rest until I, as a victim, get justice. She's entitled to get justice for whatever victimization she can prove. That's fine. But she has no right to victimize me, and I'm not going to let her get away with it. Sorry.
And just a last question of this lawsuit. What's the status of the lawsuit now? Are you anywhere near trial, or I know you just finished depositions?
COVID has slowed down everything. We had one deposition, and we're trying to depose her. I think once we get her under oath, the case is over. She can't explain how she wrote these emails in which she admits she never heard of me. She has an email with somebody. Read it in the book. You'll see. She's told who I am. Oh, include Dershowitz in your book. He's famous. He wrote Reversal of Fortune. He freed Klaus von Bülow. Put him in your book. It'll help you earn money. That's the email. It'll help you earn money. Put him in your book. His name is Alan Dershowitz. She then puts me in the book as somebody she did not have sex with.
All right. And you know what? Not to give one super chat more value than another. Thank you all for the super chats. Luke Blanche says 70% of us believe you're innocent of all claims, Mr. Alan Dershowitz. The other 30% are trying to drive a narrative or are willfully stupid. And I'm not approving or disapproving of the super chat, but Alan, this is technology now. We can bring this chat up, and now I'm going to make it disappear. Thank you very much, Luke. Okay, that's enough of that. I mean, I think if anyone, I asked the questions. I know what I think. I know why I avoid certain clients in all respects, because I don't. This doesn't happen when you hang out alone type thing. Okay,
so let me ask you a hard question.
Go for it.
Would you take me as a client?
I think I would.
I'm accused of a very serious crime. Would you take me as a client?
You know what I said? I think I would, but I think I wouldn't, only because I know that I don't take civil stuff, because the stress, I cannot deal with the stress, and I cannot deal with the heartache. And like I've said in other vlogs, I don't even like doing my job well, because I know that it's sort of a sum zero game. As well as I do my job, someone else is feeling just as that bad. And I only did it in civil stuff, so it's not like, we're not risking imprisonment. But I've seen lives get destroyed, and I'd rather.
I'm not risking imprisonment either. No
No,
prosecutor would ever prosecute me based on her history of lying, but I am in a civil suit. By the way, I apologize for my little bit of a sore throat and my sucking on a cough drop while I'm talking.
Don't
I know
worry,
that's a little impolite, but I have to do it. Okay.
Don't worry at all, Alan. Can I ask who your counsel is in the case?
Yeah, I have a very good lawyer in Boston named Howard Cooper, and a group of very good lawyers in New York, friends of mine, Arthur Idala, Imran, and a good legal team behind me, but not famous lawyers or anything like that. And I'm playing a major role in kind of organizing my own defense. My wife's working very closely with me on it, kind of as my paralegal. Remember, we have travel records that prove conclusively we were able to reconstruct every day of my life between the day that Frei met Epstein and the day she left. It's 2 years. We can account for every single day by a phone record, by my TV appearances, by meals, by American Express. There's one day that we can't account for. It's Christmas Day, 1999, 7 days before the millennium. We have no record on that day because we were on the vineyard with 18 friends in our house celebrating the millennium. So I have 18 eyewitnesses that I was on the island here on Martha's Vineyard, but I have no documentary evidence. It's the only day in 2 years I have no documentary evidence. It is inconceivable that I could have ever met her on the island, on the ranch, on the airplane in Palm Beach. I have incontrovertible evidence. My wife has put all that together because she was with me on almost all of those occasions.
Okay. It's phenomenal. This may not satisfy anybody. That's the nature of life. We've got this stuff out of the way. Now let's move on to another reason why people are begrudging you. What you said, I think it was in the interview with Jason Goodman about the vaccines. That's a legal question where the quote that's going around, Dershowitz says the government can sink a plunger into your arm. He is sanctioning forced vaccinations, et cetera, et cetera. Tell me if I'm wrong. Were you not, and I'm not trying to defend you, I just think that my understanding was you were talking about your interpretation of the Jacobson decision and not your personal policy preference on the issue. Am I wrong on that?
No, you're being too sympathetic. I was describing the Jacobson decision and predicting that the Supreme Court, probably 9-0, would allow mandatory vaccinations under several conditions. If the vaccine proved effective and safe.
Over what period of time, actually? Like, over what period of time would it need to be proven effective and safe in your mind for the Supreme Court to sanction it?
It would be a matter of degree, but I think this vaccine probably would be sanctioned by the Supreme Court, even though it was rushed through. Doubts will always be resolved in favor of health. The key point is, does the vaccine prevent the spread of the disease? If the vaccine is only designed to help you not get it, the government can't compel you to take it. Let me give you an example. If they discover a vaccine, and we all hope they do, that cures Alzheimer's or cures cancer or cures heart disease, they can't make you take it because that only affects you. If I have Alzheimer's, hey, and by the way, if you go on Twitter, everybody thinks I have Alzheimer's because I defended President Trump. I think that it's pretty self-evident that I will challenge anybody who thinks I have Alzheimer's to debate me over whether I have Alzheimer's. It reminds me of when the bishop of, the Bishop of Paris was accused by the chief Sephardic rabbi of Paris of being anti-Semitic. And the bishop, or the cardinal of Paris, who had been brought up Jewish and converted, challenged him to debate whether he was an anti-Semite, but the condition is that the debate had to be conducted in Yiddish. And the cardinal spoke fluent Yiddish, and the rabbi didn't speak a word of Yiddish. So the debate never went forward. So anybody who thinks I have Alzheimer's, I'll challenge them to a debate.
I don't think anybody watching this in their right mind is going to think you have Alzheimer's.
In any event, if it's a vaccine that only protects you, the government can't make you take it. They can't make you take a vaccine to prevent yourself from dying of a heart attack or a stroke or anything like that. But if the vaccine has a proven effect of not turning you of avoiding you becoming a typhoid Mary and infecting other people, the government can compel you to take medication against your will that is well calculated and well designed to prevent you from spreading the disease to other innocent people.
Now,
They can give you options. If you want to live in your house and a bubble and never leave, fine, you don't have to take the vaccine. If you have pre-existing medical conditions that make you allergic, etc., you don't have to take the vaccine. Religious objections may prevail. I don't believe in them. I don't think there's any reasonable religion that today prohibits the taking of vaccine. Certainly Judaism, Christianity, and Islam do not. The chief rabbi of Israel just announced that he was going to travel all over urging Jews to voluntarily take the vaccine. Look, I hope we don't have to come to this issue.
but
I
hold on.
hope everybody will accept the vaccine. But if they
Well,
don't, the people who want it should go first. And only as a last resort should the state compel people to take it. But if you need to compel people to take it in order to have herd immunity, the government has that power.
now, you say they have that power, but are you saying they have that power under the Jacobson decision or just under Emergency Measures Act decisions?
No, I think that the Jacobson decision is precedent. It's not exactly on point because it was only a fine and it was smallpox, not COVID. But if I read the Supreme Court decisions from Jacobson on, I think that mandatory vaccination for smallpox, for other communicable diseases are constitutional. There are other ways of approaching it too. Employers can require you to do it as a condition of employment. They can't make you do it if you're sick. That's Americans with Disabilities Act. Schools can make you do it as a condition of entering the school. So there are indirect ways of compelling. But in the end, if you're asking me as a constitutional lawyer, will the Supreme Court uphold mandatory vaccinations if they're safe, effective, and prevent the spread of the illness? The answer is yes, and I don't think you're going to get much disagreement about that.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, you're getting a large swath of people who say effective or not. If someone is so scared of getting a virus that has a 99 point whatever percent survival rate, depending on your demographic, they should be the one in the bubble and not me being told what I can do with my body by the government. And okay, so this is where again people have difficulty dissociating the position from the individual, where there's going to be a ton of people who are going to radically disagree with you, think what you're saying is heresy as far as fundamental rights go, but they're going to demonize you as an individual for it.
Well, tell him to go back and read John Stuart Mill, who is really the father of libertarianism. I am a libertarian. These people claim to be libertarians. John Stuart Mill would have no difficulty accepting mandatory vaccination. His general rule is never make people do things for their own good alone. But if what they're being compelled to do is necessary to prevent the spread of illness to others, the society has the right to do it. The society has the right to draft you. And if they draft you, they have a right to make you inoculate yourself. When you're drafted into the Army, you have to take 15 different inoculations, and you have no choice. If you have an illness, you can refuse to do it. If you have a conscientious objection to it, maybe you get put at the end of the line. But in the end, they're going to say you're not above the law, you're not exempt, and you're not going to make other people live in bubbles. You're going to have to be the one to live in the bubble. So, they can disagree with me, but they're wrong in terms of what the Supreme Court would say, what the Canadian Supreme Court would say, what the British High Court would say, what the European Court of Justice would say, what the German Constitutional Court would say, and what the United States Supreme Court would say. You're in the minority. By the way, I'll defend you if you don't want to take the vaccine and you get arrested for it. I'll be your lawyer. I don't agree with you philosophically, but I'll certainly defend you against the government. That's what I do.
Well, I know I think a lot of people might disagree that John Stuart Mill would agree with you. I think when John Stuart Mill would say the liberty for the individual, but if you start talking about what the individual has to do for the greater good, then you're talking communism and not libertarianism. But
no, I think if you read John Stuart Mill, he actually goes quite a bit further than I would go in preventing, in having the state impose things on people. Let me give you another example which I write about. I've written extensively about the seatbelt laws. So seatbelt laws are designed to protect you from yourself. They violate the John Stuart Mill principle. And I've invented a term that I use to describe why I think seatbelt laws should be mandatory. They're not the heavy thumb of the law. They're the light pinky of the law. They give you a $25 fine. Big deal. It's just an attempt to put a little pressure on you to do the right thing, to protect yourself and your family. So I am not a strict Millian. I do believe the light pinky of the law can sometimes make you do things only for yourself. But if they try to put anybody in jail for not wearing a seatbelt, I would be strongly opposed to that.
No, not well. It's interesting because everybody goes reflexively to the seatbelt analogy, and where I disagree with the analogy is in the efficiency, or what is it, efficaciousness of the measure compared to the policy or the solution they're trying to impose. There's a lot more of a correlative, I would imagine, effect between seatbelts and safety than mandatory vaccinations for a virus with over a certain percentage survival rate.
I don't agree
And
with
then
that.
the slippery slope is where would it start after that? Where would it stop after that? Because why not mandate? Why not force vaccination for the standard flu, which incidentally has a higher mortality rate among lower demographics?
I think it would be constitutional to do that. I think it would be constitutional to mandate the flu vaccine, but not the shingles vaccine. Shingles vaccine is only a non-communicable disease. The flu is communicable, but the distinction I'm making is a principal distinction. You can't be Typhoid Mary. That you have no right to be Typhoid Mary. You have a right to make sure you have a right to die, but you don't have a right to kill others. I'll put it very directly. Cigarette smoking, you have the right to inhale, but you have no right to exhale on me. The right to swing your fist ends at the tip of my nose, and the right to smoke your cigarette ends at the entrance to my nostrils, and the right not to have a COVID vaccine ends at my lungs. So that's my principled position. You can disagree with it, agree with it, but let's have a continued discussion. I hope we don't reach that issue. I think the issue will be, for the most part, there won't be enough vaccine to go around, and people will be lining up to get the vaccine. So let's not make people get the vaccine until we've exhausted everybody who wants to get it voluntarily. But if we ever reach that issue, I'm on the side, if the vaccine proves effective and preventive of spread, I'm on the side of mandatory vaccinations.
All right, there you have it.
I debated Bobby Kennedy on this. You can watch it on YouTube. It's about an hour-long debate. I think it's a thoughtful debate. He persuaded me on some issues. I don't know if I persuaded him on other issues, but it's a rational debate. Let's have it.
Okay, it's interesting. So it was incidentally, then I'll correct myself, and I will on social media. It was not just an assessment of Jacobson, but it's your view on what ought to be policy as well. For people will like it, people will hate it. That's right. And I may disagree with it, even though I'm not anti-vaccine by any means. I got a tetanus shot 5 years ago when I cut my finger. Okay, let's get into the one that I think, another one that's very interesting. You're suing CNN for defamation, and this will get us into the Trump impeachment. I did a video breaking it down. I don't think you have. I mean, I'm curious about this. So for anyone who doesn't know, I'll just summarize the decision in a nutshell. After Alan successfully argued the impeachment before the Senate, one of the arguments that Alan put forward was that if the president engages in abuse of power or quid pro quo, with one of the elements being his reelection in mind, to the extent, and this was what he said before, but not after, and it was cut out, to the extent it's not a criminal or criminal-like conduct, it's not an impeachable offense.
That's right.
CNN cuts out the first part, quotes the second part, runs havoc with it the way media does when they've decided someone is persona non grata. Right. When someone has crossed a line that one does not cross in a by and large left-controlled media, they segregate one section of what Alan said and ignore the first part. And then run with Alan Dershowitz says the president can commit a crime if he thinks it's in his reelection best interest. Yeah. Pundits start running with CNN's spin of the argument or straw man of the argument, because they did take something you did in fact say, but excluded something that you did in fact say as well, which qualified.
Let me give you a perfect example. I will say on this show the following. Virginia Giuffre has said that I'm a pedophile. Okay? Virginia Giuffre has said that I'm a pedophile. CNN then puts on the air me saying I'm a pedophile, just leaving out Virginia Giuffre says I'm a pedophile. Wouldn't everybody say that was defamation? They deliberately doctored the tape to take out the fact that I didn't say I was a pedophile. Virginia Giuffre said I was a pedophile. That's what CNN did. I spent 67 minutes on the floor of the Senate saying a president can be impeached if he commits a crime, if he commits criminal-like behavior, if he commits a violation of law, over and over and over and over again. Then I'm asked a question by Senator Cruz. What about quid pro quo? I said, well, what would make a quid pro quo unlawful is if the quo was illegal, if it was illegal. And then I went on to say, but if a president just wants to get reelected and thinks his election in the national interest, that would not be impeachable. They took out the part in which I said illegal and unlawful. They doctored the tape and they had me saying that a president can do anything. So then you get the three blind mice, hand over their ears, their eyes, and their mouth, not their mouth, unfortunately, saying that what I said could be said by Hitler, Stalin, and Goebbels, that what and Mussolini, that what I said was that a president can do anything, even commit any crimes, even commit crimes. He can commit any crimes. That clearly is defamatory. And so I am suing them for defamation for doctoring the tape. And I will contribute the money to charity if I win a judgment, but somebody has to stand up to CNN and they have to stop doing that. They did it with that young boy from Virginia, and they had to pay a fortune for doing that. They've done it on other cases. Look, it's Zucker. He's the head of CNN. We're going to be able to prove that this was a deliberate, willful decision. It wasn't an accident. That there were memos in the file. We have information about this. That the decision was made to make Dershowitz look foolish. He did a good job on the Senate floor defending the president. Now we want to make him look foolish. If we can persuade the American public that he said a president can commit any crime, then he's discredited. And that's exactly what they did. And it's exactly why, hopefully, they will have to pay considerable damages to good charities.
It's an interesting thing because the lay with dogs analogy works both with clients and with the media, because you were adored by the media for decades until you did something that made you no longer adored by the media, and then the media turns its machine on you. Now, I happen to think in your lawsuit, I believe it's in your lawsuit, you're citing a decision which I think is easily distinguished, because the decision that you're citing falsely attributed a quote. It put something in quotes that the individual didn't say. Where in this case, I'm more inclined to see this case as straw manning your argument. Any educated person, any reasonably informed person knows they are straw manning. I'm not going to use insulting words. They are straw manning, and what they're doing makes them look stupid and not you. The problem is
only if you know the whole thing. If you only know what they want you to know, it makes me look stupid. But again, it's as if I said, this is what I don't believe. A president can do anything. And they take out, this is what I don't believe, and just put in a president can do anything. That the mere fact that they didn't change my words, but they just omitted qualifying words that make what I said what I wanted to say, change the meaning as much as if they had put quotes in my mouth that I didn't say. I think a jury would find no difference between this is what I don't believe and taking that out, and me just saying a president can be impeached if he engages in unlawful or illegal behavior, and they left that out.
Well, I got to tell you, I'm not convinced, but I'm listening. So the analogy is good. The analogy highlights, I think.
I never sued anybody until I was 75. I've never sued anybody. First 75 years of my life, I never sued. Never was sued. Not even for anything covered by insurance. Never. And now my life is lawsuits. I'm suing Frei. I'm suing Boys. I'm suing CNN. And I'll let you know a little secret. I'm suing Netflix as well, because they ran the Netflix series in which they had Frei falsely accuse me. I had given them all of the evidence that I've talked about, all the evidence from my book, Guilt by Accusation. They promised they would use it. I conditioned myself going on their interview with their promise to use it, and they deliberately and willfully broke their promise and didn't use it and presented Frei as a completely credible person. So I'm suing them as well. So, hey, I'm getting a lot of lawyers rich, but I didn't think I'd spend the last years of my professional life involved in lawsuits.
Well, I mean, that's where I've been. I saw you on, I think it was Good Morning America, where you said, I'm looking forward to the lawsuits. I have a theory. No one is ever looking forward to lawsuits, nor should they. But at some point, I mean, look, you believe in it. It's clear you believe in it. Right. And what is the status of the CNN lawsuit? Has there been a response?
Yeah, they've responded. They made a motion to dismiss, and we're filing very soon our response to the motion to dismiss. If the motion to dismiss is denied, we then go to depositions, and we will depose the heads of the company, the heads of CNN. We'll look for the directions they gave to their editors and be able to prove that they made a willful, deliberate decision designed to make me look bad. There was some leaks of some tapes of calls with Zucker in which he says, let's make Senator Lindsey Graham look bad. He deserves it. And let's edit his, basically what they did to me, they did the same thing to Lindsey Graham. So
we know
there's a pattern.
We know the way CNN works. I mean, CNN is next level nonsense. But here's a question: first of all, who's your judge?
We have a judge in Florida in the CNN case, and then we have a judge in New York in the other case.
Okay, so if it's Florida, I won't know. I'm wondering if it's the same judge from another case that we reviewed. If you get past the motion to dismiss and there's an offer to settle, do you accept it?
No.
And what do you accept it ever, regardless of the? Do you accept?
Well, if they can feed a lot of hungry people with the offer and give a lot of charity to a lot of good causes and go on television, admit they were wrong, show the whole tape and show me and give me an opportunity to explain what I said, show what I said on the floor of the Senate, maybe there's room for negotiation. But right now I want to go to trial. And I guarantee you I will never settle with Viva Frei. She has to go to jail. She has to go to prison. She has to be convicted of perjury. That's the only way I would settle a case. If she pleads guilty to perjury, I'll settle the case.
Okay. Now, next one, we've got a few minutes. Let's just get to one that I know people are interested in. Let me just check my notes. Let me just check incidentally, have you talked about the Texas lawsuit on your show, The Dersh Show?
Have I talked about which lawsuit?
Sorry, the dismissal of the Texas suit in the elections lawsuits.
Oh, the Supreme Court case. Yeah, I've talked about that, of course. Yeah. Look, I think the Supreme Court really was sending a message to the courts all over the country. Don't get involved in this election. It's too messy. The clock is run. It's not like Bush versus Gore. And I think the judiciary will generally stay out of this lawsuit. I think that's the message that the Supreme Court gave with two justices, with all the justices, the three justices appointed by President Trump, going against his view.
So, and by the way, incidentally, just to plug your show, because it's not just because this is where you can go to hear some more stuff about this. So it's called The Dersh Show, DERSHOW on YouTube. So if you want some analyses of some of the stuff that's going on from someone who is an actual constitutional scholar and not somebody talking at you from their car, check out The Dersh Show. But what is your opinion of the judgment? Now, whether or not they would have denied the standing on a more substantive decision, do we agree that it's sort of, some people call it cowardice, some call it dereliction of duty? Can we agree that at least it's not the best way to go about dismissing a lawsuit of this importance on a 2-line summary, no standing, no cognizable injury, with nothing more? Is that the wrong or the right way to do it?
I think it's not the right way to do it. I think it would have been better if there had been a decision responding to the good points I thought made by Justices Alito and Thomas. And I think the American public's entitled to a more definitive, substantive resolution. And all they got was a very, very brief, curt, no standing, as you say, you correctly described it.
Do you think, let's just hear would you take any case?
Another cough drop. Okay.
Go for it. Would you take any case involving Trump contesting the election before whatever court would hear him?
I gave it the office. I've already made my contribution. I'm not an elections expert. I am an expert on impeachment and criminal law and constitutional law. So I like to limit my involvement to cases that I really can bring my expertise. As I said, I like to bring the classroom into the courtroom, and I used to bring the courtroom into the classroom. So I'm going to continue to comment on these election cases. But I think basically the challenge is over. I think the clock is run. I don't think we're going to see any major substantive changes. The strongest case was the Pennsylvania case, because there the courts of Pennsylvania went beyond what the legislature had authorized, and the Constitution leaves the selection of electors entirely up to the state legislature. So I think they had a good case in Pennsylvania, but the numbers weren't there apparently.
And now actually I'm going to plug two people. Eric Hunley, who has another YouTube channel where I just debated Nate the lawyer, who's another YouTube lawyer. And Alan, we had the discussion about the Texas lawsuit. And I said, setting aside the substance, I thought there were good arguments on the substance in the argument of Texas actually suffering prejudice to its constitutional rights by virtue of state laws being unconstitutionally applied, which impacted the elections clause. On the substance of that argument, how much weight would you give it, regardless of whether or not it gets dismissed on the merits? Do you think there's any substance or any plausible way of arguing that?
Yes, I'll give you an example. Let's assume that Texas or some other state said, look, we don't believe in democracy. We don't want the voters to decide who's president. We, the state legislature, are going to pick electors. We're not going to let anybody vote. Election day is canceled. We're going to have our own election day in the state legislature, and we're going to pick the 26 whatever electors. And let's assume those electors who were picked went in opposition to what the voters would have done. I think a state would have standing to challenge how the state of Texas picked their electors. I don't know who would win. The Constitution seems to authorize the state legislature to pick electors, but I can't imagine they would say the state doesn't have standing, the state of New York or the state of California or the state of Pennsylvania. If the electors selected by the legislature went against the people and the people's vote would have determined a different outcome for the presidency. I think people in the state that lost the election that would have won would have had standing. So I think they too quickly dismissed the standing issue.
Amazing. And one last question before I bring up the super chat, obligatory, is it was Alito and Thomas who had the dissenting opinions. I didn't understand from what they said. Did they say they would have granted standing, or they would have heard it but not granted the relief, or did they not adjudicate on the relief?
They said without indicating how they would have come out on the merits, they thought that there perhaps could have been standing. It was, it was a very hypothetical dissent from a hypothetical majority. We didn't see full argumentation on either side.
All right. And now bringing up Chris Pavlovsky. I'm sorry, I mangled your last name. Pavlovsky. And it's not because I don't know how to pronounce it. My tongue got stuck. Let's get the Dersh Show on Rumble, faster growth than YouTube, and no censorship. Alan, I'm going to send you a referral code at the end of this. Chris Pavlovsky is the CEO of Rumble. He's the CEO I just did the interview with a week and a half ago. I think we can make that happen. I'll talk with Dersh's people after this. And thank you very much for the super chat, Chris, and everybody else. Check us out on Rumble. I'm on Rumble. A lot of people are moving to Rumble, and there's other content. There's cat videos on Rumble as well, but there's also great content, substantive content. Alan, I said I would keep you for an hour and a half. I think that's the best possible time to end this because we got the stuff out that people were asking about. No one's going to accuse.
Well, let me just make one point. I was a little tough on some of your viewers, and I was a little curt and sharp. I apologize. That's just my style. When I started teaching at Harvard 55 years ago, a number of the students said, "You're being rude. You're cutting off people in the middle of the sentence." I said, "It's cultural. I come from Brooklyn. Where I come from, you always cut people off in the middle of a sentence. That really is the highest praise. It means, I got it. I get the point. You don't have to continue. You're smart. You made your point very effectively." So I apologize for any style issues. I say what I think. I say it directly. I say it unapologetically. I don't mean anything personal. I just think for me, that's the most effective way of getting my argument across.
And I'll say this in faith in my true base of however many hundreds of thousands of people, they're not sensitive. They don't judge people for having discussions with people who are diametrically opposed. And I'll leave it at that. They would never have been insulted in the first place. We're going to say, I'm seeing some of the super chats who have bigger questions. We're going to save it because we're going to do this again. But Alan, thank you very much.
I enjoy this very much. I love hard questions, and you're a great interlocutor, and you've asked great questions, and I really have enjoyed being on.
Well,
I never thought I'd enjoy spending a Saturday night with you on YouTube, but I have.
And it's the funny thing. I said never in a million years would I have thought I'd be doing Saturday night live streams with lawyers, let alone Alan Dershowitz. And you've answered the questions, and people are going to love you or hate you for the answering the questions the way you did, but unapologetic. And people sometimes hate that as well, but it doesn't matter. We got the questions, everybody. Alan, everybody check out the Dersh Show on YouTube. It soon's going to be on Rumble, and we're going to do it again. And one day.
Well, thank you. Just one more thing. The Dersh Show only lacks one thing. Dersh Show, it lacks the wits. and the wits are provided by the callers. So when you watch the Der Show, call in, because I really love to answer hard questions put to me by my callers.
Amazing. And one day, Alan, sooner than later, we're going to get you, me, Robert Barnes, and we're going to talk about some thorny issues.
Great.
So everybody, thank you all for tuning in. Alan, stick around. We'll say our proper goodbyes afterwards. And everyone, thank you very much. See you guys soon.